Hello and welcome back to another new edition of Windows and Current Affairs, and today we talk about the post-COP27 over the whole world and what is going to be affected after all the recommendations that were taken in that very important event that took place on the 7th of November in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, and was widely applauded by the whole world and attended by delegates and world leaders and intellectuals and of course environmentalists and all the people who are concerned with climate change. Today we're going to be talking about what is going to be taken, what are the laws that are going to be affected, and how the world is going to be turning totally into green. We're going also to be talking about how Egypt and Africa in general is going to be benefiting from COP27 and executing one of the first and foremost goals of sustainable development, which is standing up to the challenges of climate change. And we're very delighted to be having with us here live in the studio African Affairs researcher Dr. Mohamed Taha Abdul Gaber. Good evening.
Good evening.
Dr. Mohamed. And let's first talk about the situation of Egypt and Africa when it comes to the dangers of climate change first, before we get into details.
Let me first of all welcome you and all your decent audience. For the COP27 summary, what happened in the Sharm el-Sheikh summit was totally different from all the 26 versions that previously held in different capitals of the world. The main title for this summit were turning from only pledges to implementation. And what happened was historic, and I think Egypt, not only me, but all the world thank Egypt for the decent and disciplined organizing of the summit and all the events alongside the main event, and the welcoming of 130 leaders from around all the countries of the world. The main achievements or milestones Egypt achieved successfully in this summit was 2 points. The first one was initiating the loss and damage fund, and the other one is the launching of the adaptation agenda for the climate change or post-climate change and bad affections of the climate change globally. That was we spent a lot of time for 26 versions of the similar summits, just talking and just taking promises from the responsible countries of the pollution that happened on the earth. And we saw the turning up and down from the environment on all of the countries, especially the poor countries and the countries that
suffering most.
Yes, that never had a hand on this pollution, and they only got destroyed their lands and their soil and their corpse, and the national security of these countries and the food security became vulnerable.
Exactly. That's why I mentioned Africa, because in COP27 they totally agreed that Africa was one of the continents that were prone to the hazards of climate change because of the greedy practices of the developed countries, industrial countries that are locating, they talked in the sense of waste, industrial waste, in the sense of carbon emission, in the sense of the economic greed that has many forms, and also because of relocating their industries to the third world that is represented in some African countries. And that's why the effect of climate change was exaggerated, or was took a totally high turn when it came to dangers of or challenges that could face the environment. And these were the most important topics that among the most important topics that were raised in COP27. So in that light, how do you assess the coming stage according to Africa and according to the recommendations of COP27? Do you think it's going to be promising, and there is some dim of hope that countries in Africa could still face the challenges that are meeting the causing climate change?
To be honest, till now we cannot raise the our expectations from the upcoming summit in Emirates in Dubai, because of the outcome itself, to make the implementation come true from the developed countries to pay annually $1 billion. That's not equivalent to the volume of the size of damage that happened to the developing countries and the poor countries. $1 billion, I think it just reflects 20% of the real cost that African countries for infrastructure and to take precautions and preparations to face the climate change hazards, which never stopped, because we are talking now some European countries and USA and some developed countries decided in a reply for what is happening globally from political clashes and the crisis.
The political conflicts?
Yes, the conflicts. They decided to depend again on the fossil fuels and on the conventional energy resources, since they don't have any resources, and we know that Iran and Russia have some conflicts with America and the European countries. That makes obtaining oil from those countries became risky, and became the cost has raised too much for European countries and USA. So instead of they decide to invest more in green energy and like green hydrogen and solar power and wind power, they decided to go back to to the 17th century, and depending again on the to generate electricity on the conventional and the fossil fuels. So that never cut the origin of the problem, or never stop the origin, what causes climate change. So that's why I can tell you we cannot raise our expectations from the upcoming summit, but we have an asset to build on, which is the initiation of the loss and damage fund and the adaptation agenda to raise the awareness of the African countries and Latin America countries and South Asia, most of the vulnerable countries to the climate change hazards. That launching of this agenda gives some precautions the leaders of those countries can take and tell their people and the responsible people in their countries to face slightly I cannot tell that will cut completely or defend completely the climate change hazard, but that's slightly became an advantage for those countries. We can tell that the climate change summits or the conference of the parties, like the acronym of the COP, we can tell it succeeded in achieving its objective when we make the developed countries decide to change their policy, their agendas on generating power to the green power. We saw in the summit the agreement that Mr. President Abdel Fattah Sisi declared between Egypt and Norway to launch the first green hydrogen project in the SC zone, which is Suez Canal Economic Zone. We had a long term of negotiations and meetings, but in the summit itself, in COP27, we saw and we all were happy as Egyptians for the European people or European countries to choose Egypt as the regional hub for the green hydrogen production. And that's not only this project. We are talking now around 23 projects in the same zone, in the Suez Canal Economic Zone, but it's in the studying phases and the feasibility studies, and so to decide to sign the final contracts to begin launching and begin generating the green hydrogen for the ships bunkering, to give them fuel and all the services, all the related services to fuel and the green fuel we are talking. What the achievement as well happened in the in the shipping industry. All of the biggest players around the world in this industry decided to turn the ships to be running by the green hydrogen and green ammonia, which is I think it's a milestone when we are talking around the consuming itself. Those ships were consuming and were polluting the environment very much. So we are talking about a turning point now in this policy.
Right. We need to know the most important benefits that were taken by African countries, or that are expected to be taken by African countries after COP, the ratifications of COP27, in the sense of industry, in the sense of transforming environment into totally green areas, like implicating green economy policies. I mean, all the principles of COP27, which were badly or gravely needed, direly needed by the African countries. How do you assess it? If you like to elaborate.
I think as well that's the other side of success story that happened in the COP27, which is some of the African countries, I think Senegal and Algeria and Namibia, Nigeria, maybe my memory are not collecting all the countries that got benefited from this summit. In the topic of recycling and production of the green energy, they attracted, or they succeeded in attracting and fulfilling some contracts with the developed countries to invest in green energy production and recycling of the waste, the African waste, especially the dangerous waste and the industrial waste that making disease for African people, and where the cost of curing this damage were too high for the African countries to stand. Then they decided as well. There were, I think, 3 successful agreements to replace the debts, the governmental debts of the African countries with green investments. So African countries can change their policy in industry and recycling their materials locally, and instead of paying the sum of or a percentage of their debts to foreign countries and developed countries, they decided to make an investment in this what they called debt replacement or debt elimination. So I think those 2 milestones for African countries were happened in Egypt in this summit. So the African Union and some of the African media called it the African Summit, because it was really the voice of Africa got loud, and
it was the savior for Africa.
Yes.
Right. You are an African affairs researcher, and you have a pretty good idea about the situation when it comes to breaching or violating the rights of environment by implicating wrong policies of industries, and probably throwing waste, probably affecting not affecting the laws that might protect the environment. Talk to us about the most dangerous challenges that are posed, that are challenging or affecting danger over climate change and causing climate change in Africa.
We cannot judge African policies of the polluting industries because if we put ourselves in their shoes, we can find that they needed any kind of or any means of investment. They cannot decide which industry they can take and which industry they can refuse. That's a welfare. It's not available for all the African countries. Whenever a foreign investor decides to invade the African market or get in the African market with some industry that causes pollution and environmental costs, governments has not this they are not having the liberty or the space to say no or to refuse this kind of permits because of their people are needy and they need those investments to make their economy flourish apart from the environmental cost. So we cannot judge on the government, African governments, because they don't have a choice. So what happened in Sharm el-Sheikh summit was changing all this policy and to somehow obligate developed countries to invest in specific kinds of industry which are less harmful to the environment, like green energy we talked earlier, and the recycling.
Right. Talk to us about also the efforts that, governmental efforts that are exerted or starting to be exerted to be able to turn those countries, to implicate green economy in those African countries and to ratify the laws that would regulate and protect at the same time the environment and preserve or maintain the idea of a green life that is essential for the future.
We can take our country, Egypt, as an example because it's African, of course.
Of course.
And
because of it's a role model.
Yes.
We have implied that we have already succeeded in doing that in like almost 7 governorates until this very moment.
Yes, and we already have, like you said, a role model. We see High Karima projects and the green energy productions in Bimban for solar power, and in the Zafarana and Ras Gharib wind power generators, and as well the green hydrogen, like we talked in Sokhna and Eastern Port Said. And as well the initiatives to raise the awareness, like Prepare for the Green, which was under the auspices of Mr. President Abdel Fattah Sisi. This initiative targeting to raise the awareness of all the Egyptian people in each and every sector, to make their usage of the materials and the resources moderate, and not to pollute the environment, and to consider the upcoming generations in using resources, to preserve our resources, not to lose them, like water resources and energy resources, and even agricultural crops and production. So, and we already expanded our agricultural projects we turned our desert into green projects, like the 1.5 million Fedden, yes, to make a national equilibrium or satisfaction for our not to import foreign goods and food, because that costs a lot of money, and we need those money for development and for sustainable development of our upcoming generations. So Egypt has already cut a long miles in this section. And as well, we see some changes by the parliament in laws, and some fines to waste water or to pollute your neighborhood. That I think will change the scene in dealing or the everyday lifestyle of the Egyptian people.
Right. When talking about the challenges of climate change, it is not only, we're not only talking about Africa. No matter how we did in Africa to try to maintain the environment and stand up to the challenges of climate change, we will never be able, the world is never, will never be able to be safe unless the whole continent or the whole world join hands together and unite on working hard, honestly and religiously, to maintain the environment and save the world, the globe, from the challenges of climate change. So in that sense, how do you estimate other industrial countries' practices after COP27? Do you think that more laws should be implied by international community like the United Nations, like the European Union? What exactly is supposed to be taken to be able to bring words into reality, not only in Africa, but most importantly in industrial countries, because industrial countries are taking their industries to Asia, to Africa, to developing countries.
Like you mentioned, we need, that's a matter of collaboration between countries. All efforts need to be side by side in order to achieve our objectives in this field. So I think that we need an African movement or an Asian movement to, in the United Nations summits, different summits, and to call for change for the depending on from the developed countries on depending on the conventional and fossil fuels. That needs to be stopped, and we can see that USA decided or launched a special law to change some of its depending on conventional fuels on to green fuels, and for this they gave or nominated some certain amount of money, which is still not efficient, but I think that's a step on the right way. So we can build on this, and we can make a political propaganda campaign from the African countries and the more vulnerable countries to make or to stress on this issue, and to make obligations internationally, and to launching some special laws for this, to make obligations on the foreign governments to turn their pledges and talks into implementation and implication.
Into action.
Yes.
Talk to us as an African researcher about the most pressing causes and issues in the African continent on its way towards development and towards green economy. Where exactly do you see the problems, and how could we sort it out?
It has many aspects. We can say culturally, the people behaviors needs to be changed. Each and every person needs to change his lifestyle and how he deals with environment and resources, because it's not infinite. The global resources needs to be moderately used, not to waste our upcoming generations, and to preserve our environment, and to face the current challenges on the climate change and the global warming. We need to stop our what we are doing wrong in everyday life, to waste water or to burn the
coal and
waste,
the rice,
and yes, that pollutes the air that we breathe, and the water, and all the surroundings. The dealing with environment, people needs to understand that it's a dynamic action. If you did wrong, the environment will pay back. If maybe you are not the one who pays back, but the upcoming generation. You are wasting your family, your people, your children. We need to stop this. That's cultural wise, and economic wise. We can make or call our African leaders and all the leaders around the globe to change the mindset of the economic behaviors and the economic actions into green economy and sustainable economy. Like we said, green energy and the food security, because the challenge of food security around the world, we saw the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was a very dangerous challenge for food security around the world because of the supply chain crisis which happened around the world. And now we are facing some political conflicts which cause again the shortage of supply chains around the world. That makes it difficult to accelerate the movement and the actions by the government. So no one can go alone in this. We need to collaborate our efforts. We need to go side by side to make it effective. Because I dream about all the parties of this political conflict to abide to the call or the invitation by the decent invitation by Mr. President Abdel Fattah Sisi and the Sharm Sheikh summit when he called for peace and for negotiations and to stop blood and stop war. Because the challenge is more than two countries to make a political conflict. No one will make it out from this conflict with advantages or benefits. All will lose.
Right. You've raised a very important point, which means, which is the awareness, setting awareness amongst societies in Africa, in developing countries, even in some European countries also, about the dangers that might result from climate change, and how can we be able to preserve the environment, how can we be able to lessen those dangers by our practices. It's not only burning coal, it's not only industries that threaten the climate change, it's not only the greed, economic greed that threaten the climate change, but also the hierarchy of the endangered species, the environment, cutting the trees. And we've seen what happened in Australia and in California, the fires every year in the forests of California. And we have seen the fires, the burnings that are happening in Australia also. We have seen the avalanches that happens in some European countries. These are all wrong practices that happen because of the lack of awareness when it comes to the environment. The illegal hunt of some animal species, because the theory, the hierarchy of animals, the consumer and the predator, these are all very important and essential for the ecosystem and the biological balance. Such things and such issues are supposed to be taught to people. Probably there are some people who are totally unaware of it, and this is a huge problem.
I can assure what you are mentioning, because every action you make from once you wake up and you wash your face, the amount of water you consume, how you eat, how you recycle or not recycle your waste, your own waste. I'm talking on the individual level. So what if we are talking on the society like Egypt, which consists of 100 million individual? That makes problems, because the unaware people, if we put the individual wrong actions together, it will make a challenge which turns after some few years into a crisis. And we saw some islands that got drowned under the water. Yes.
And we have seen the pandemics that were affected in China because of the wrong practices.
Yes.
The problem is that there are some economic powers, like the biggest economic power probably worldwide, which is China, which is also happening to be the biggest source for climate change, because of the total disrespect for the environment and for the species of animals. and for the illegal hunting and the consumption of animals, some species that affected in the disturbance of the ecosystem and the biological balance and affected in pandemics.
Some selfish behaviors by politicians and businessmen around the world. I am talking about the mega companies. I think they never thought they will pay back for what they did to the environment. But
they're blinded by greed.
yes, but the time came, and each and every person around the globe saw the payback and the very expensive cost of the pollution and the climate change. No one is away. No one will survive by his own. It's a matter of.
It's going to affect everybody.
Yes, it's a circular matter.
Right.
What you are doing now will affect your neighbor and will turn back into you.
Of course. Mr. Dr. Mohamed Taha Abdul Gaber, African Affairs Researcher, would like to thank you so much for your valuable input and coming over to Windows and Current Affairs. Thank you so much for coming. And I guess this would bring us to the end of this edition of Windows and Current Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us, and until we see you again next week, that's a goodbye.